Today we can finally cover the Tier 6 premium Italian battleship, the BA Binna. I might be mispronouncing that, I don't care, I have no idea how you're supposed to say these weeb names. But the BA Benna is basically, like the other two BA ships released in this wave, a copy-paste of an existing ship. This time it's a copy-paste of the Tier 6 tech tree Italian battleship Caracciolo. I'm going to put my commander build on the screen. It's this Konuri Maki lady. Note in the 4th row of skills, I do have her unique skills selected over Master Mechanic. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. But first, let us go over the differences between this vessel and the one on which it is based. According to the Blue Archive article that Wargaming released some time ago when these ships first debuted, this ship has the differences between it and Caracciolo are as follows. The main battery HE shells are replaced with SAP shells, which have a maximum alpha of 11,800. The main battery range is increased from a base of 15.8 km to 16.6. Main battery shell grouping, or sigma, is increased by 17.65%. So we go from 1.7 sigma to 2.0 sigma, much more accurate. The secondary battery no longer has SAP, it has HE shells, and of course these are very small secondaries, so they don't really pen anything, and building into the secondaries on the Binna would not be worth it, whereas on the Caracciolo it might, because certainly its SAP secondaries will pen things. The secondaries which shoot HE on this vessel, there are a bunch of 90mm ones, which I assume follow the conventional HE pen rules, and that of course means they can literally not pen anything. It does have a couple 152mm secondaries. Those can pen something, but the base range on these things is 4.7 km, so definitely not worth speccing into. And on top of that, well, actually, the base range is 4.5 km. I've got it at 4.7 because there's a slight buff from Aiming Systems Mod 1. Also, the reload on these secondaries is very much nerfed. It's 8 seconds for the 152s, 4 seconds for the 90s, much worse than Caracciolo. Well, not much worse, but worse. And then the damage of these secondaries is reduced because they shoot HE instead of SAP, so that is also lower. The detectability by sea is apparently increased on this vessel from 14.3 to 15 km, and instead of the smoke generator consumable, we have the main battery reload booster consumable. So when I first saw this ship, I basically thought this is sort of like a miniature version of the Lauria, another 8-gun Italian battleship. Of course, it's at legendary tier, and it's got 457mm guns. On the BA Benna, we have 8 381mm or 15-inch guns. With this build, they've got a range of 18.3 kilometers. The reload is 33 seconds, much like the actual Caracciolo. And to be honest with you, I think the 33-second reload does make sense when you're firing SAP out of the main battery guns. But now that this thing is present in the game, I don't know why the Caracciolo itself has a 33-second reload, considering its guns shoot AP and HE. The SAP is a pretty powerful ammo type. We've seen a little bit of it in effect so far, and I don't really like this ship that much, to be honest with you, mostly because I find the SAP on this vessel to be much more inconsistent than the Laurias. I think we've already gotten some hits with the SAP on the Helena a little bit earlier, and, you know, it did some decent damage. We're going to shoot at this New Mexico who's sort of kiting away, and despite the improved accuracy, and also, for that matter, Iachino as one of the inspirations on this thing, the consistency of these shells actually hitting the targets you aim at seems a little bit questionable to me. And then, of course, the SAP Alpha is 11,800, but you're never actually going to reach that number unless you hit a Citadel on anything, which you can, but only on a couple of vessels, namely the Atlanta. That's about the only one I can think of. I suppose that would apply to the Flint as well. maybe the Harbin, but I don't know. I've certainly citadeled in Atlanta with these sap guns, so there is that, and there's few things more satisfying than citadeling a light cruiser with your Italian battleship sap. It's just devastating. The AP, on the other hand, has a relatively anemic alpha of only 11,000 even. The turret traverse, though, is quite snappy. It's influenced by the commander build, and we've got a 24-second turret traverse. Our HP is not exactly that impressive. It's 50,500. We've got 25% torpedo damage reduction. And the armor, it's fairly robust. We've got a 26 millimeter upper bow, but we do have an icebreaker that wraps around the entire bow and is 150 millimeters. And then, of course, the belt armor on the side is very robust and thick. It's 150 millimeters on the upper belt, and the deck is 40 millimeters. Or no, it's 30, I believe. In any case, it can bounce battleship shells. The superstructure is vulnerable to being hit. And on the stern, of course, the stern armor is also 26, and it's got a slight icebreaker on it, but it doesn't wrap fully around the stern, so if you are kiting, it is easier to get overmatched through that armor plating there than it is through the bow, due to the icebreaker on the bow, which pretty much covers the entire thing. It's very large. I think it should protect you from getting citadeled bow on. Not exactly the same stern on. As for the AA defense, well, it's got an aggregate rating of 65, but the Italian AA I don't think is known to be very good. That's mostly down to the range. The longest range on these AA guns is a whopping 4 kilometers. By the time they even start shooting at any planes that might be trying to drop you, well, the planes are probably already in the process of dropping, and so I think the AA here is pretty irrelevant. Also, torpedoes hurt with that 25% torpedo damage reduction, but something could be said here for the Italian battleships generally. They have a unique feature where pretty much all of them have 4 repair parties base instead of 3. And that's the same thing for the BA Benna. That's kind of nice. And that, going back to the commander of this ship, she is sort of like one of those hybrid commanders like Henry J. Hyde. She's got flammable cannoneer in the first row, and then in the last row, she's got master mechanic. So she's the kind of commander you can spec for extra gun range, extra gun accuracy, and extra survivability with master mechanic. And of course, if you have her fully ranked up, you get 2 extra repair parties from master mechanic, which means you can get up to 6 heals if you'd like. Now, if you want to use her unique skill in the 4th row, which I said earlier we would talk a little bit about, then you have to give up Master Mechanic and only take the 4 heals base. Although in the Legendary row, you've got a choice between Will to Rebuild, Testudo, and Fight Fire with Fire. I've elected for Fight Fire with Fire just because I think that is an excellent survivability skill. It doesn't have too much to do with the gimmick of turning off or extinguishing fires and floods when you've got 3 going simultaneously and no damage control party available. That's nice, of course, but the main value of Fight Fire with Fire is the fire damage reduction to your ship for each active fire. I've got this lady at rank 12, Legendary 2. The fire damage reduction is 9% for each active fire. And of course, fire damage to your battleship is percentage based. It removes 0.3% of your total HP per second for the full duration, which usually adds up to several thousand hit points lost to a full duration fire burn. If you can knock the damage down by 9% or even 12 or 15% if you have her ranked higher, well, that's good for your survivability. Now, you could take Testudo. That does give you an extra repair party charge, and it reduces damage from shells, torps, and bombs while your repair party is active. You could do that if you wanted an extra heal and were going to take the unique skill in the 4th row, but I still think you want Fight Fire with Fire. Now, the unique skill is called Paint Them All. What it does is increase battleship projectile damage per 1% of current enemy HP. Now, at rank 12, Legendary 2, the buff to the projectile damage is 0.9%, which means if you are firing at a full HP enemy ship, then your shells are doing 9% more damage, I suppose. And then as they lose HP, the damage buff to your shell decreases. At least that's how the skill reads: projectile damage per 1% of current enemy HP. So it's a buff that scales downward as the enemy loses HP, as far as I can tell. That's a very weird setup for a commander skill. I don't really know what the value of that is. I've heard people in the community say that that skill is really good, but if I'm reading this correctly, and again, it says battleship projectile damage per 1% of current enemy HP. That's a buff to your damage per percentage of enemy HP. So as the HP gets lower, the buff gets less effective. I think it would be perhaps a more useful skill if it worked the other way around, where the buff scaled as the enemy lost HP, and so you did more damage to lower health targets to help finish them out. But as it stands, the buff really only influences your initial salvos when the enemy is at higher HP and makes the damage higher then. It's very weird. I think I would probably run Master Mechanic over it, but for the purposes of testing the ship, I was using that skill. And to be honest with you, I don't know if you can even discern the difference between having that skill running and not. In a situation like this, where say you're firing at a broadside California with the sap and you do 7,000 damage, without that skill active, I think you'd still be doing around 7,000 damage. I don't know, it's hard to tell. As for the rest of the specs on this ship, they're pretty much identical to the Caracciolo, honestly. The maneuverability, we've got a maximum speed of 29 knots, turning circle of 740 meters, and a rudder shift of 14.3 seconds. Those are all pretty good parameters for a battleship. The thing does feel quite maneuverable, and that's nice. I do like maneuverable battleships. And then the concealment, well, of course, I've got the concealment module running, and I've got Kondo as one of the inspirations. That gives me a detectability of 12.1 km. I just realized that the detectability on my actual Caracciolo is worse at 12.8 km, even though the notes on the article say that Benna's detectability is worse relative to Caracciolo. That is apparently because I've got the RGA mod on the Caracciolo. I'm going to have to replace that with the concealment mod. What am I doing there? Anyway, this ship is, as I said in the beginning, a copy-paste of the Caracciolo, with the main difference being that we've got sap on the main battery guns and the main battery reload booster instead of smoke. So you probably think, as I did initially, that this is a copy-paste, or not a copy-paste, a lower-tier version of the excellent Laria with a main battery reload booster. What could go wrong? Well, the thing that I think goes wrong here is, even though the accuracy on this ship is improved, and even though I am improving it with Iachino further as an inspiration, I've found that the performance of this sap is inconsistent compared to Laria. You saw in that last salvo against the New Mexico that we were able to land a bunch of sap shells and take him out when he was fully angled. That is basically the value of sap. It's kind of an overpowered armor type or armament shell type in terms of its conceptual makeup, let's say. HE and AP both have clear upsides and downsides. The upside of HE is that it pens a set armor value, a low one, regardless of angle, and if it doesn't pen, then it has the chance to light fires to deal damage over time, but if it does pen, the damage is relatively low. Whereas AP needs a flat angle in order to pen at all, and if it does pen, then it's going to do more damage relative to HE, and it has the ability to hit citadels much more easily than HE and deal actual critical damage, whereas SAP combines both of these things. It's got penetration similar to HE and alpha similar to AP, the upsides of both shell types. And so I think it's a very strong shell type. It certainly does some pretty good damage. We got good results in this battle with the high caliber metal in spite of our loss. But ultimately, I don't know that I would recommend buying this ship. It's a copy-paste of Caracciolo, And unless, well, I guess you might want to get it if you don't have any other main battery sap slinging Italian battleships. I think there's only two, the Marco Polo and Laria, and neither of those are available. So if you're curious about sap performance on main battery guns for a battleship, maybe this is the ship to get for you, but honestly, I haven't enjoyed playing it all that much. I'd much rather play the Laria at legendary tier. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.